The rancher spent one night with two Apache sisters, and nothing was ever the same. The rancher had spent many years on the edge of the Arizona plains, living a life that was quiet, lonely, and predictable. His days were filled with tending the cattle, repairing fences, and walking the long stretches of dry golden land that stretched far beyond the horizon. The desert sun rose early and fell late, casting long shadows across the ranch, and the silence was only broken by the occasional howl of a coyote or the distant call of a hawk circling in the sky. He had grown used to this life of solitude. Friends and neighbors were far away, and family had long since moved on, leaving him to keep his ranch alone. He liked it this way, in some respects. The routine gave him comfort. The work kept him busy. But at night, when the stars shone brightly over the vast desert and he sat alone by his small fireplace, he often felt a quiet ache for connection, for conversation, for something beyond the daily chores. One late afternoon, as he was repairing a section of fence near the water source at the edge of his property, he noticed movement among the trees. At first, he thought it was a deer or some other animal, but as he looked more closely, he realized that there were two figures, small and careful, observing him. They moved with quiet grace, staying just at the edge of the clearing, where the light of the setting sun barely reached them. The rancher froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. He had always respected boundaries, and he did not want to frighten them or appear threatening. So, he simply put down his tools, stood up slowly, and raised a hand in greeting. The two figures, as he soon saw, were young women. They appeared cautious, curious, and perhaps a little frightened. Their dark eyes watched him carefully, and their movements were careful and deliberate. One of them stepped slightly forward and then retreated, as if testing the safety of the space. The rancher smiled softly and spoke in a gentle voice. "Hello there. I won't hurt you. You're welcome here." His voice was calm, steady, and meant to reassure them. He said no more, letting them decide how to respond. For a long moment they simply watched, silent and still. Then, slowly, one of the sisters stepped closer, her hand brushing the leaves as she moved. The rancher could see that they were tired, dusty from travel, and their clothes showed signs of wear from long days outside. There was something honest and open in their demeanor, even in their caution. He thought of his own loneliness and how rare it was to encounter anyone in this vast land. Perhaps fate had brought them here. Perhaps this was more than chance. "Do you need water?" he asked quietly, indicating the small stream nearby. The two sisters glanced at each other, then at the water, and nodded. He filled a small container with water and offered it to them. Their hands were small, delicate, and as they drank, the rancher noticed a sense of relief on their faces. He realized they must have been walking or traveling for a long time without much rest. He gestured toward the ranch, a few hundred yards away. "You can stay for the night. It's safe here," he said. There was no demand in his voice, only an offer, and it was clear they understood it that way. The sisters hesitated, exchanging glances. There was an unspoken conversation between them, silent but full of meaning. Finally they nodded again and stepped forward, trusting him enough to enter the open space. The rancher led them carefully to the cabin, pointing out the simple comforts it contained: a small stove, some blankets, and a few wooden chairs. He did not ask questions yet. There was no need. Trust had to come first. Once inside, he offered them food. He had some bread, dried meat, and fresh vegetables from a small garden he tended. The sisters accepted, eating slowly and politely. As they did, the rancher watched them carefully, noting the way they moved, the way they spoke in quiet tones to each other, and the small smiles that appeared when they thought no one was watching. He could see that they were not strangers to hardship. Their eyes carried stories of struggle and resilience. Yet despite that, there was a spark of curiosity and intelligence that shone brightly, even in the exhaustion of travel. As the evening drew on, the three of them sat around a small fire in the cabin. The rancher spoke softly about the land, the cattle, and the desert. The sisters, in turn, began to share small stories about their lives, their family, and the traditions they held dear. Their voices were gentle, but there was strength in them. a quiet confidence that came from living close to the land and understanding its demands. The rancher listened, fascinated by their stories. He had never met anyone who could speak so clearly about survival, culture, and family. He realized that even a short night like this could teach him lessons he had never thought to seek. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the dark night air. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly, bathed in the pale light of the moon. Crickets sang, and the wind whispered across the plains. In this quiet, the three of them found an unexpected sense of peace. There was no fear, no judgment, only the simple understanding that strangers could share a space safely, that kindness could bridge gaps of language, culture, and background. The rancher felt a warmth in his chest that he had not felt in years. It was not romantic love or desire. It was something perhaps rarer: trust, empathy, and the connection that comes from recognizing the humanity in another person. The sisters showed gratitude through their actions and through the careful way they spoke. They asked questions about his life, about the land, and about the people he had known. They were genuinely interested, and their curiosity encouraged the rancher to speak openly, sharing thoughts and feelings he had long kept to himself. For the first time in many years, he felt heard, not as a rancher or a worker or a solitary man, but simply as a human being whose experiences mattered. As the night deepened, a calm silence fell over the cabin. The fire burned low, casting a soft, warm light across the room. The sisters prepared for sleep, laying out blankets on the floor and tucking themselves in. The rancher watched for a moment, appreciating the peacefulness of the scene. He realized that this night, though simple in its events, would linger in their minds. The bonds formed tonight were not dramatic or flashy. They were small, subtle, and quiet, but they were no less powerful. Trust, understanding, and shared humanity had a way of shaping lives quietly yet permanently. Before he settled himself, the rancher spoke once more, softly, almost as a blessing. "You're safe here. Rest well." The sisters nodded, their faces relaxed for the first time in many days. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, carrying the faint scent of the desert flowers and the distant sound of flowing water. The rancher lay down on his own blanket, staring up at the ceiling, thinking about the paths that had led them all here. He felt a sense of anticipation, a quiet expectation that life was about to change in ways none of them could yet imagine. In the stillness, the rancher considered how fragile life could be, and yet how unexpectedly powerful small acts of kindness were. One night, one small gesture could alter the course of a life, planting seeds of trust and connection that might grow for years. And in that moment, he understood that even in a life spent mostly in solitude, meaningful encounters could occur, shaping hearts and minds in ways that routine could never achieve. He felt a deep respect for the sisters, their courage, their resilience, and their willingness to trust a stranger, and for himself, for the simple act of offering safety and comfort. Outside, the moon rose higher, casting silver light across the plains. The desert seemed endless, but within the cabin a small world of warmth, understanding, and quiet connection had been created. The rancher closed his eyes, listening to the soft breathing of the sisters, and for the first time in many years he felt that the night, though ordinary in some ways, would remain extraordinary in memory. Something had begun here, a subtle shift in all their lives, a recognition that the world could be kinder, gentler, and more connected than they had imagined. This night marked the start of a bond that would grow slowly, shaped by trust, respect, and shared humanity. It was not an ordinary night, nor an ordinary meeting. It was the night when paths crossed, when worlds touched, and when lives quietly began to change forever. And though none of them knew exactly how the future would unfold, the rancher and the sisters would always carry the memory of this first encounter, the night of trust, compassion, and unexpected connection, deep in their hearts. The next morning, the rancher awoke to the soft golden light of the desert sun streaming through the small window of his cabin. The warmth of the fire from the night before had faded, leaving a gentle chill in the air. Outside, the land stretched endlessly, bathed in soft light, the wind whispering through the tall grasses. He could hear the distant call of a hawk and the faint rustle of the sisters moving quietly in the cabin. They were awake early, preparing themselves with the careful grace of people used to living close to the land. Breakfast was simple: fresh bread, a few dried fruits, and some water, but there was a sense of ease in the room that had not been there before. The rancher watched the sisters as they ate, noticing how naturally they moved, how they respected each other, and how they carried themselves with a quiet dignity. There was no hurry, no fuss, only a calm rhythm, a gentle harmony that filled the small space. The rancher felt a subtle joy in this calm, realizing how rare it was to encounter people who seemed so connected with themselves and with one another. After breakfast, the rancher offered to show the sisters more of the ranch. They agreed, curiosity brightening their eyes. As they walked together, the rancher explained the work he did each day: the care of the cattle, the maintenance of fences, the small patches of garden that provided some food. The sisters listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and observing closely. They were impressed with the way he understood the land, how he could read the weather, the soil, and the movements of the cattle with such skill. For the rancher, it was unusual to have such attentive and respectful listeners, and he found himself speaking more openly than he usually did, sharing not only facts but stories of past experiences, moments of triumph and failure, and the small lessons learned from years of solitary life. The sisters in turn began to share more of their own lives. They spoke of their family, their community, and the challenges they had faced. Their words were honest and straightforward, carrying the weight of real experience without complaint or bitterness. The rancher listened, fascinated by their resilience and insight. He could sense that despite their youth, they had already learned lessons that would take many others a lifetime to understand. Their stories were filled with both struggle and hope, and the rancher realized that their strength came not from avoiding hardship, but from meeting it with courage and determination. As they walked back toward the cabin, the sisters paused near a small patch of wildflowers growing by the edge of the stream. One of them knelt down, gently touching the petals, and spoke softly about the beauty of the desert, the way life could survive even in harsh conditions. The rancher watched her, feeling a deep appreciation for her sensitivity and awareness. It reminded him that there was much more to life than survival and routine. There was beauty in small things, lessons in quiet observation, and meaning in connection. The day continued with small, simple activities that slowly wove them together. The rancher taught the sisters how to mend a broken fence, showing them the proper way to handle the tools and materials. They worked together, laughing when mistakes were made and celebrating small successes. The sisters showed him techniques they had learned from their family, ways to handle livestock and navigate the land that were unfamiliar to him. He was impressed by their knowledge and adaptability. By the end of the day, there was a sense of camaraderie, a quiet respect that had grown through shared work and mutual teaching. As the afternoon sun began to lower in the sky, the rancher suggested they rest by the stream. The sisters agreed, settling on the soft grass as they watched the water flow gently past. Silence stretched comfortably between them, a silence that spoke of understanding and trust. The rancher reflected on how strange and unexpected this bond had become. In the span of a single night and one long day, they had moved from strangers to companions, in a way that felt natural and right. It was not something he could have predicted, but he was grateful for it. The sisters, too, seemed aware of the change. They spoke in low voices about their hopes for the future, about the importance of family, community, and personal strength. They were careful not to speak of anything that would cause worry, but there was a quiet confidence in their words. The rancher listened, absorbing their wisdom and feeling a sense of humility. He realized that despite his years of experience and independence, he had much to learn from them, not only about the land and survival, but about life, relationships, and human resilience. As evening approached, the air grew cooler, and the desert sky turned brilliant shades of orange and pink. They returned to the cabin, where the rancher prepared a modest dinner. As they ate, they shared stories of their childhoods, moments of laughter, and the small adventures that had shaped their lives. The room was filled with warmth, not just from the fire, but from the growing connection between them. It was a connection built on trust, respect, and the quiet joy of understanding another person.
After dinner, they gathered around the fire once more.
The night was calm, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of desert flowers and the distant sounds of wildlife. The sisters spoke of their dreams and fears, and the rancher shared some of his own. There were no judgments, No interruptions, only attentive listening and thoughtful responses. In this space they could be themselves completely, without pretense or expectation. The rancher marveled at the depth of insight these young women possessed, and he felt honored to be a part of their lives, even for this brief time. As the fire burned low, one of the sisters asked about the stars. The rancher stepped outside with them, pointing out constellations and sharing small stories associated with them. The sisters listened, their eyes wide with wonder, and for a while the world beyond the desert seemed full of possibility and hope. The rancher felt a renewed sense of purpose and joy, realizing that life, even in its quiet and solitary form, could offer moments of beauty, learning, and meaningful connection. The night deepened, and the sisters prepared for sleep once again. The rancher watched them with a sense of quiet satisfaction and reflection. He knew that this night, like the first, would leave a lasting mark on all their lives. The bond they had formed was subtle but powerful, a reminder that kindness, trust, and shared humanity could create connections that endure beyond the circumstances that brought people together. As he settled down on his own blanket, he thought about the lessons of the day. He had witnessed courage, resilience, and intelligence in the sisters. He had shared his own experiences and reflected on his life in a way he had not done for years. There was a quiet understanding between them now, a recognition that they were more than strangers passing through each other's lives. They were companions in a moment of shared humanity, shaping one another in small but meaningful ways. Outside, the desert was still and peaceful. The moon shone brightly, casting silver light over the plains, and the stars twinkled like distant fires in the vast sky. The rancher felt a sense of calm and hope, knowing that life, even in its routine and solitude, could offer unexpected moments of connection and growth. He closed his eyes, feeling the quiet power of the day's events settle in his heart. It was a night of trust, understanding, and human warmth, a night that would linger in memory and influence the choices, actions, and feelings of all three of them for years to come. The rancher realized that sometimes the most profound changes in life came not from grand gestures or dramatic events, but from small acts of trust and shared experiences. One night, one day, could alter the course of lives, planting seeds of connection, respect, and empathy that might grow quietly over time. He felt gratitude for the sisters' trust and courage, and he hoped that in some small way he had offered them comfort, safety, and a sense of belonging in return. As the fire dwindled and the desert night deepened, he drifted into a peaceful sleep, carrying with him the knowledge that life, even when simple and solitary, could be transformed through kindness, understanding, and the quiet bonds of shared humanity. The day had been a turning point, a step toward deeper connection, trust, and emotional growth. And as the stars shone over the desert, the rancher and the sisters knew that nothing in their lives would remain quite the same again. Days passed after that long night and the following day spent together. The rancher returned to his usual work, tending to the cattle, checking fences, and walking the land that he knew so well. Yet everything felt different now. The memory of the sisters lingered in his mind, their laughter, their voices, their careful attention to the world around them. Even the simplest tasks felt infused with new meaning, as if the land itself had taken on a subtle warmth from their presence. The rancher found himself pausing more often, noticing small details he had ignored before, the way the wind shifted, the patterns of birds in the sky, the sound of water flowing in the stream. Life, once predictable and ordinary, now seemed full of quiet wonder and potential. The sisters had returned to their family, leaving behind the cabin that had felt suddenly alive with conversation and connection. The rancher missed their company, but he also understood that life had to continue. Work had to be done, cattle had to be cared for. Yet he could not ignore the subtle changes in himself. The sense of curiosity, the feeling of empathy, and the recognition of how much small human connections could shape life in ways he had never considered. He began keeping an eye on the paths they had taken, wondering about their journey and hoping they were safe. Meanwhile, the sisters returned to their community, carrying with them stories of the rancher, the kind, quiet man who had offered them shelter and food without asking for anything in return. Within their community there were questions. Some elders wondered why they had trusted an outsider, someone from the ranch lands, someone who lived far from their people and their ways. But the sisters spoke with honesty about their experience. They described the kindness they had received, the warmth of the cabin, and the feeling of safety and respect they had found. Slowly, the elders began to understand that trust and connection could exist even between those from different worlds.
The sisters' careful words built bridges, demonstrating courage and judgment in ways that were thoughtful and measured.
Back at the rancher found himself reflecting on the lessons of the past few days. He thought about how often people lived their lives in isolation, assuming that others could not be trusted, that distance or difference meant danger or disconnection. He realized that human kindness, even in small gestures, could overcome fear and suspicion. The memory of the sisters, their attentive questions, their quiet respect, reminded him that life could offer moments of unexpected learning and personal growth. He felt a sense of humility, recognizing that even someone who had lived alone for years could still be shaped, still be changed by others. One afternoon, as he repaired a fence near the stream, he noticed signs that someone had passed by recently. The broken branches, the footprints in the soft soil, the subtle marks of travel. He knew immediately that it must have been the sisters, perhaps returning briefly or visiting nearby before continuing their journey. His heart lifted at the thought of seeing them again, even for a moment. He felt a deep appreciation for their courage and their willingness to trust him, knowing that life in the desert was rarely easy and that one's choices were often difficult. As the days grew longer and the sun hotter, the rancher continued his work, but he also began to change in small ways. He took more time to notice the patterns of the land, to observe the animals, to understand the subtle interactions between environment and life. He thought about the sisters and the wisdom they had shared, their knowledge of survival, their respect for family, their connection to nature. He realized that learning was not confined to books or formal instruction. It could happen anywhere, in any encounter, if one was willing to pay attention and listen with an open heart. The rancher also began to prepare for the possibility of future encounters. He cleaned the cabin more thoroughly, arranged the small comforts with care, and made sure that food and water were readily available for any visitors. It was not just practical, it was symbolic. He wanted the space to be welcoming, to reflect the trust and respect that had been shown to him by the sisters. Each action he took was thoughtful, deliberate, and infused with a new sense of purpose that had not been there before. His solitary life was gradually becoming richer, more meaningful, and full of subtle joy. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, the rancher saw movement at the edge of the property. Two figures appeared, moving slowly and deliberately through the trees. He recognized them immediately. The sisters. They had returned, this time not out of necessity, but by choice. Their presence brought a rush of emotion, relief, happiness, curiosity, and a quiet awe. They approached the rancher with smiles that reflected trust and familiarity, a sense of comfort in their shared history. The rancher welcomed them warmly, guiding them toward the cabin and offering water and a place to rest. That night, as they gathered by the fire, the conversation turned to challenges and worries. The sisters spoke of difficulties they had faced since leaving the ranch, of tasks that had tested their patience and courage. The rancher listened with care, offering suggestions where appropriate, but mostly providing support through attentive presence. The firelight danced across their faces, casting shadows that seemed to move with the rhythm of their words. The room was filled with a quiet intensity, a sense of connection that was deepening with every shared story. It was a night of mutual understanding, one that strengthened the bonds formed in the earlier encounter and laid the foundation for a lasting friendship and trust. The sisters also shared knowledge that was new to the rancher, techniques for tending animals, ways to navigate the desert, and observations about the land that he had never noticed. He was impressed and grateful, realizing that learning could come from anyone, anywhere, at any time. The exchange of knowledge and experience created a subtle balance of respect and equality, reinforcing the idea that their connection was not one-sided but mutual. Each person brought something valuable to the table, and the result was a deeper understanding of the world and each other. As the night continued, they discussed hopes for the future. The sisters spoke of their dreams, the aspirations they held for their community and their family. The rancher reflected on his own dreams, which had often been small and limited by the isolation of his life. He realized that the bonds formed with the sisters had expanded his perspective, allowing him to see new possibilities and paths he had not considered before. It was a subtle transformation, not dramatic or sudden, but powerful in its quiet persistence. By the time sleep approached, the three of them felt a sense of fulfillment and peace. The rancher prepared blankets, ensuring the sisters would be comfortable, and they arranged themselves near the fire, speaking softly until their voices faded into silence. The rancher watched them for a moment, appreciating their presence and the unique qualities each brought to the space. He reflected on how much could happen in the course of a single day. A shift in perspective, a change in understanding, the beginning of trust and friendship that could last a lifetime. As he lay down on his own blanket, the rancher thought about the lessons he had learned. Life was unpredictable, and people could surprise you in ways that were both profound and simple. Small acts of kindness, moments of shared experience, and the willingness to trust could transform lives quietly but permanently. He felt gratitude for the sisters' courage and their willingness to connect, and he understood that the night ahead would offer more opportunities for growth, understanding, and deepening relationships. Outside, the desert was calm, with the stars shining brightly over the endless plains. The wind carried the faint sound of rustling leaves and the distant cry of animals moving through the night. In the cabin, a small fire flickered, casting warm light and long shadows, creating a space where trust, empathy, and connection could flourish. The rancher closed his eyes, feeling the subtle power of the day's events settle in his heart. This was not merely an ordinary day. It was a moment of transformation, a turning point in which lives intersected and shifted in ways that were meaningful, lasting, and profound. As sleep overtook him, the rancher felt a deep sense of contentment. The sisters had returned not because they needed to, but because they chose to, and this choice reflected the trust and understanding that had been established. The bond between them had grown stronger, shaped by shared experiences, mutual respect, and the simple power of human connection. It was a quiet, enduring transformation that would influence the choices, actions, and feelings of all three individuals in the days, months, and years to come.
The rancher understood that true connection required patience, attention, and empathy.
It was not something that could be forced or hurried. It had to grow naturally, through shared experiences and mutual respect. The night had been another step in this growth, reinforcing the lessons learned in the previous encounter and adding new layers of understanding and trust. He felt a quiet pride in the relationships forming, not from ownership or control, but from recognition of the value each person brought to the space and to the lives of others. As the desert night continued, the rancher drifted into sleep with a sense of anticipation and hope. He knew that life would continue to offer challenges and opportunities, that the work of the ranch would demand his attention, and that the sisters' presence in his life might not always be immediate or constant. Yet he also knew that the bonds formed in these quiet, shared moments were lasting. They would endure beyond the confines of the cabin and the limited time together, shaping hearts, guiding decisions, and leaving a lasting imprint on all their lives. Weeks passed since the sisters returned to their family, and the rancher's life continued with the rhythm of work and routine. Yet there was a new awareness in him, a quiet change that shaped every action. He noticed small details on the ranch, the curve of the hills, the way the sunlight touched the streams, the soft movement of cattle grazing in the distance. Life had taken on a different texture, colored by memory, by the warmth of connection he had experienced with the sisters. He found himself smiling more often, humming under his breath while mending fences or guiding the cattle across the plains. Even in solitude, he carried with him the lessons of trust, the importance of understanding, and the subtle joy of companionship. One morning, as he was checking the water troughs, he noticed something unusual at the edge of the property. A small trail of footprints, delicate but deliberate, led toward the cabin. His heart lifted instantly. He recognized the marks of the sisters. They had returned, not by accident, but intentionally. Their presence was both comforting and exciting, signaling that the bond between them remained strong and meaningful. The rancher hurried to the cabin to prepare for their arrival, gathering extra blankets, water, and food. He wanted them to feel welcome, to know that the space was ready and safe, a small sanctuary in the vast desert. When the sisters arrived, their faces reflected a mixture of determination, joy, and relief. They moved with confidence, yet maintained the careful grace that had first drawn his attention. The rancher greeted them warmly, feeling a surge of gratitude for their trust and presence. He led them inside, offering water and a simple meal. The cabin, small and modest, felt alive with their laughter, conversation, and movement. It was no longer just a place for shelter. It had become a meeting point, a shared space of learning, support, and quiet friendship. That night, as they gathered around the fire, the conversation turned to challenges and the events that had occurred since they were last together. The sisters spoke of obstacles they had faced in their community, the scarcity of food, the responsibilities of family care, and the need to maintain harmony within their village. They spoke honestly, without exaggeration or complaint, describing the difficulties they had encountered and the strategies they had used to overcome them. The rancher listened carefully, offering support, guidance, and thoughtful reflection. He was impressed by their strength, wisdom, and determination, recognizing qualities that were rare and remarkable. In turn, the rancher shared the challenges he had faced on the ranch during their absence. He spoke of difficulties with the weather, the unpredictability of livestock, and moments of solitude that had been both comforting and challenging. The sisters listened attentively, their faces reflecting understanding and empathy. The exchange was not one-sided. It was a mutual dialogue, where experience, knowledge, and emotion flowed freely between them. Each person brought something valuable to the conversation, strengthening their bond and deepening their understanding of one another. As the evening progressed, the discussion shifted from challenges to opportunities. They spoke of ways to improve life on the ranch and in the sisters' village, brainstorming ideas and sharing insights. The sisters suggested ways to use natural resources more efficiently, methods for tending animals that would reduce strain, and ways to cultivate the land for sustainable growth. The rancher contributed his practical knowledge, explaining the nuances of animal behavior, water management, and the rhythm of desert life. The dialogue was lively, respectful, and productive, leaving each person with new perspectives and a sense of shared purpose. Later, the sisters invited the rancher to join them in a small activity outside. They moved to the edge of the property where the desert met a line of trees and began demonstrating techniques for navigating the land, reading subtle signs in the environment, and understanding the natural rhythms of life. The rancher observed closely, eager to learn, asking questions when needed and practicing the techniques they demonstrated. He realized that these skills were not only practical but also symbolic. They represented attentiveness, awareness, and respect for the world around them. The sisters' guidance reinforced the idea that life was about observation, learning, and careful action, lessons that applied as much to human relationships as to the land itself. The night deepened, and they returned to the cabin. Dinner was simple, but the conversation continued, flowing naturally from one topic to another. They spoke of family, community, and the values that guided their decisions. They shared memories from their past, stories of resilience, and reflections on the lessons they had learned.
The rancher was struck by the depth of insight the sisters possessed, even in their youth.
He realized that wisdom was not always measured by age but by experience, reflection, and the ability to connect with others thoughtfully and empathetically. After dinner, they settled near the fire for quiet reflection. The rancher observed the sisters, noting the way they interacted with each other, supportive, careful, and attentive. He reflected on the journey that had brought them together, from that first night of cautious trust to the shared experiences that had deepened their bond. It was a bond that had grown through patience, respect, and mutual understanding, not through grand gestures or dramatic events. The quiet moments, the shared work, and the attentive listening had created something enduring, a connection that would influence their choices and feelings long after this night ended. As the fire burned low, the conversation turned to the future. The sisters spoke of their aspirations, hopes, and the changes they wished to see in their community. They expressed a desire to continue learning, to strengthen their family ties, and to contribute positively to the world around them. The rancher listened with deep respect, understanding that their dreams were rooted in responsibility, care, and a desire to make life better for others. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, realizing that his own aspirations could align with theirs, creating opportunities for shared growth and mutual support. The night wore on, and the air grew cooler. The desert was quiet, with only the soft sounds of wind and distant animals breaking the stillness. The sisters prepared for sleep, arranging blankets carefully and ensuring they were comfortable. The rancher followed suit, settling down with a sense of contentment and reflection. He thought about the transformations that had taken place in the past days, the growth of trust, the strengthening of bonds, and the quiet lessons learned from shared experience. He understood that life was not always shaped by dramatic events, but by the subtle accumulation of moments filled with attention, care, and empathy. As he lay down, he reflected on the power of connection. Even brief encounters could leave lasting impressions, shaping thoughts, feelings, and actions in ways that were profound yet gentle. The sisters' presence had transformed his understanding of trust, kindness, and human potential. Their courage and openness had opened new possibilities, revealing that relationships built on respect and shared experience could endure and thrive, even in challenging circumstances. The night was a reminder that life's most meaningful changes often arose from quiet, intentional acts and the willingness to engage openly with others. The rancher drifted into sleep, carrying with him a sense of gratitude and hope. He knew that challenges would continue, storms, unpredictable weather, and the demands of the ranch, but he also knew that the bonds formed with his sisters would guide and support him. Their shared experiences had created a foundation of trust, understanding, and resilience that would influence future actions and decisions. He felt a profound appreciation for the opportunity to learn from them, to share moments of growth and reflection, and to experience the quiet strength of human connection. Outside, the desert night stretched endlessly, illuminated by the stars and the silver light of the moon. The wind whispered through the trees and across the plains, carrying a sense of calm and continuity. In the cabin, the small fire glowed gently, casting shadows that flickered and moved with the rhythm of the night. Within this space, 3 lives intersected, shaping each other through shared presence, empathy, and the willingness to listen and understand. It was a night that would be remembered not for drama or spectacle, but for the quiet depth of human connection, the reinforcement of trust, and the cultivation of understanding that would endure far beyond this evening. As the fire slowly diminished, the rancher thought about the future. He recognized that the connection with the sisters had introduced a new dimension to his life, a dimension of engagement, reflection, and mutual support. It was not merely companionship, it was a partnership in understanding the world, in navigating challenges, and in growing as individuals. The lessons learned during these days would shape his decisions, his perspective, and his interactions with others, offering a model of empathy, respect, and attentive living. The sisters' presence had shown him that life could be enriched by curiosity, kindness, and the willingness to engage openly with others. It was a reminder that trust once established could transform relationships and create opportunities for growth, understanding, and joy. The night reinforced the subtle but profound truth that even in isolation, human connections could emerge, flourish, and leave a lasting imprint on hearts and minds. As the rancher finally closed his eyes, the warmth of the fire fading and the desert night deepening, he felt a sense of peace and fulfillment. The bonds formed with the sisters were no longer tentative. They were real, enduring, and meaningful. He knew that life would continue to bring challenges and opportunities, but the trust, understanding, and mutual respect shared in these quiet moments would serve as a guide and support. It was a night of transformation, reflection, and quiet joy. A night that marked the continuing evolution of 3 lives, forever connected through empathy, experience, and the simple yet profound power of human connection. The days after that night passed with a quiet rhythm on the ranch. The rancher continued his work, tending to the cattle, repairing fences, and walking the sunlit plains. Yet he felt a subtle shift in himself that had grown since meeting the sisters. Their presence in his life had brought a warmth and awareness that colored every thought, every action. Even the simplest routines, the way he cleaned the troughs, the way he measured the land, the way he led the cattle to water, felt more meaningful. He carried with him the memory of their laughter, their curiosity, and their careful, respectful nature, which had left an imprint on his heart. Life, once so solitary, was no longer simply survival. It had depth, connection, and purpose. Meanwhile, the sisters had returned to their village, Resuming their daily routines while reflecting on their time at the ranch, they carried with them not only supplies and stories from the journey but also the experiences and lessons they had gained. They spoke with family members and friends about the kindness of the rancher, the trust he had offered, and the safe space he had created. Some elders were cautious, questioning why young women had interacted so closely with a man from outside the community, but the sisters explained everything carefully and respectfully. Their honesty and clarity gradually convinced their family that trust and goodwill could extend beyond familiar boundaries. The sisters had learned a subtle truth, that courage, openness, and discernment could create bridges that might otherwise seem impossible. The rancher noticed changes in his own behavior as well. He spent more time observing the land, the wildlife, and the patterns of nature. He began to reflect on the lessons the sisters had shared, how to read subtle signs in the environment, how to approach challenges with careful thought, and how to appreciate the small, often overlooked details of life. These were practical lessons, but they also carried a symbolic meaning, teaching him about patience, attentiveness, and respect for others. The rancher realized that even brief encounters could leave lasting impacts, shaping perceptions, actions, and emotions in ways that were both gentle and profound. Weeks later, an unexpected event brought the sisters and the rancher back together. A sudden problem arose that threatened the ranch, perhaps a minor injury to a herd of cattle, or a sudden shift in the weather that made travel dangerous. Simultaneously, the sisters' village faced a small crisis, a shortage of water, or a damaged shelter. Each situation, though manageable, required cooperation, skills, and quick thinking. The rancher reached out to the sisters, sending a message along a familiar path. They returned promptly, ready to assist, guided by the trust and bond that had developed between them. Their reunion was warm, full of relief, and reinforced the idea that meaningful connections endure through both ordinary and challenging times. Working together, they addressed the challenges with a sense of focus and purpose. The sisters demonstrated skill, knowledge, and courage, assisting the rancher in ways that went beyond simple help. They guided animals with care, tended to the injured, and assessed the land with insight that complemented the rancher's own expertise. The rancher in turn offered strategies, guidance, and a steady hand, ensuring that the efforts were coordinated and effective. Their collaboration was seamless, showing the power of trust, shared experience, and mutual respect. By the end of the day, the challenges had been resolved, and each person gained a new sense of accomplishment, pride, and understanding. As evening fell, the group returned to the rancher's cabin. They gathered by the fire, reflecting on the day's events and the lessons learned. The sisters spoke of how the experience reinforced the importance of teamwork, observation, and trust. The rancher shared his own reflections, noting how he had come to see life differently, how the bonds formed with the sisters had expanded his understanding of human connection, courage, and empathy. Their conversation was rich, thoughtful, and full of insight. The firelight danced across their faces, highlighting the depth of the moment, the quiet satisfaction of collaboration, and the mutual respect that had grown from simple beginnings. In the following days, life settled into a balance that was both familiar and transformed. The sisters returned to their village, but the connection remained strong. They continued to correspond through visits, messages, and shared stories, reinforcing the trust, care, and empathy that had developed. The rancher noticed subtle changes in himself. He was more patient, more aware, and more open to the experiences and perspectives of others. He found joy in small moments of connection, whether through a shared laugh, a thoughtful exchange, or simply the presence of another person. Life had grown richer, imbued with lessons learned, bonds strengthened, and a deep understanding of the quiet power of human relationships. The rancher reflected often on that first night, when trust had been extended and received. It was a simple gesture, yet it had initiated a chain of events that transformed multiple lives. From that night forward, he viewed his work, his surroundings, and his relationships with renewed attention and appreciation. He recognized that life was not simply about survival or routine, but about moments of connection, kindness, and understanding. Even small actions, performed with care and attention, could ripple outward, shaping the experiences and perspectives of others in meaningful ways. The sisters, too, experienced lasting change. Their time with the rancher had reinforced their understanding of trust, courage, and the importance of empathy. They returned to their community with strengthened confidence, prepared to navigate challenges with thoughtfulness and care. The lessons of cooperation, observation, and respectful communication enriched their daily lives, influencing their decisions, their interactions with family, and their approach to future challenges. The bond they shared with the rancher remained a source of guidance, inspiration, and reflection, a reminder that meaningful connections could transcend distance, circumstance, and difference. Months passed, and the rancher continued to thrive on the ranch, carrying the lessons of the sisters with him in every action. He maintained regular contact with them, exchanging stories, insights, and advice. The trust and respect that had been established endured, providing a foundation for ongoing friendship, guidance, and mutual support. The land, once a backdrop for solitary work, became a space for shared experience, reflection, and the quiet celebration of connection. Each day was imbued with meaning, shaped by both the labor of survival and the subtle growth that came from caring, attentive relationships. The rancher often reflected on the transformative power of shared experiences. He understood that life's most meaningful moments were not always dramatic or extraordinary. They could be quiet, simple, and gentle, yet no less profound. The night with the sisters had been such a moment, a turning point that had opened doors of understanding, empathy, and trust. Over time, the lessons learned had woven into the fabric of daily life, influencing thought, action, and perception. The connection formed had left a lasting imprint, shaping not only the rancher's life, but also the lives of the sisters and, by extension, their families and community. As the sun set over the plains, the rancher would often stand at the edge of the property, watching the sky turn brilliant shades of red, orange, and purple. He felt gratitude for the bonds he had formed, for the trust extended to him, and for the quiet lessons that had transformed his perspective. Life, once predictable and solitary, had become vibrant, layered, and full of possibility. The sisters' presence, though temporary in the physical sense, had created enduring change, teaching him that meaningful relationships are built on respect, empathy, and shared experience. Even in moments of solitude, the rancher carried with him the warmth of the connections he had made. The lessons of patience, attentiveness, and understanding were ever present, influencing his actions and his approach to challenges. He understood that the world could be generous, that trust could be given and received, and that kindness could ripple outward in ways that were both visible and subtle. Each day on the ranch became a testament to these lessons, a living reminder that life is shaped not only by labor or circumstance, but by the quality of relationships and the care with which one engages with others. The sisters, living their lives in the village, continued to share the wisdom, kindness, and understanding they had gained. They applied the lessons of cooperation, observation, and empathy in their interactions, strengthening their family and community ties. They carried the memory of the rancher and the shared experiences with him as a source of inspiration, guidance, and reflection. The connection endured through distance, time, and circumstance, demonstrating the quiet but profound impact of human relationships grounded in trust, care, and mutual respect. Years later, the rancher would reflect on that night, the following days, and the ongoing bond with the sisters as a pivotal point in his life. The lessons of trust, empathy, and connection had reshaped not only his perspective but also his actions and relationships. He understood that life's true richness comes from meaningful engagement with others, from attentiveness, kindness, and the willingness to build trust and understanding. Even brief encounters, when approached with openness and care, can leave enduring marks on hearts and lives. The rancher continued to live on the plains, caring for the land, the cattle, and the small comforts that sustained him. Yet he did so with a deeper sense of purpose, gratitude, and awareness. The sisters' presence in his life, though physically temporary, had created lasting change, teaching him that connection, respect, and empathy are the true foundations of a life well lived. Nothing in his world was quite the same again, and he welcomed the change, understanding that even a single night, shared with care and trust, could alter the course of multiple lives forever.